Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Reed. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. We appreciate you coming to join us today. We're going to talk about lots of interesting things. We're going to have some great guest speakers, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, who is going to be the moderator for today's session.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Shelley. I'm Kelly Shaw Sutherland. I'm with a senior project manager with Just Tech. I work with Shelley on this project to provide webinars throughout the year. We are going to be joined by Sarah Cross and Tony Liu. I'll let them introduce themselves, but this is our general agenda for change management. I'm going to go ahead and shift it over to them and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll have a quick poll that we want everyone to fill out. And Sarah, you're first. Why don't you go ahead?
Hey everybody, thank you for having me. My name is Sarah Cross. I'm at Lakeshore Legal Aid. I am currently a project manager for Lakeshore, but this is my 7th year at Lakeshore. And the first 6 years that I worked there, I worked as a staff attorney. And we do a lot of change management because we changed case management systems in the last a couple of years, and of course the pandemic. So we have become very well versed in what works and what doesn't work. Trial by fire on that.
Thanks, Sarah. Tony?
And I am Tony Liu. I'm a senior consultant at Just Tech. And I started my career as a legal aid attorney in New York City, made the switch over to doing tech work with Pro Bono Net and have also served as a director of Pro Bono. So been kind of on both sides of using technology, being part of a program that is implementing new technology, and trying to help people through change management as we support them in new tech projects.
Thanks, Tony. So before we get started and jump in, we're just gonna ask everyone to give us a little bit of information. If you could, in the chat, just tell us what you think, who should be involved in any sort of change management process. Go ahead and throw that up in the chat. We'll give everybody a minute or two to do that as people are joining, and I'll just remind folks as people join. So we'll give that a minute or two. Okay. So we've got a lot of C's. Hopefully that's helpful for Tony, you and Sarah. A lot of people are saying all the stakeholders, including the employees, management, and clients. I think that's going to be your winner, at least for right now. Thanks, everyone. Let's see. I've got too many. I had this down to a science the last time. All right. I can put that back in. I think we've got some information here. So we're going to jump to the next screen. Let's see here if this goes. Okay. We're going to jump right into talking about understanding change management. And I will throw this over to Sarah and Tony to talk about, and then we'll just kind of have a little bit of a discussion about this.
You want to start, Tony, or do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah. So change management is I mean, it's a practice that probably needs to be integrated in any kind of significant change in your organization. And we're not just talking about like tech implementation projects. So I think that oftentimes is sort of where that emphasis comes up. But, example, my last organization that I worked in was organized into units based on which office they were in. And then there was an effort to restructure to be based in units that were organized by substantive law practice, right? So suddenly you had generalists having to become a specialist in family law or a specialist in housing. Those types of changes, I mean, I think obviously any organization would recognize that those require some plan to help ease the change into those new structures without just saying one day you report to this person, the next day you report to this one, and these are your new teammates. But anything from those kind of major significant structural changes or changes to adopting a new case management system to, things that might seem a little bit more minor, but still will have a significant impact on staff. I think it's worth considering the need to actually kind of put down a plan, no matter what kind of change you're trying to introduce to the organization.
I completely agree. I one thing that we've really tried to do since the pandemic is to kind of build change management into our culture and resilience, and really kind of talk to staff regularly with a really top-down approach, where we've trained some of our more senior management staff in change management techniques, and a lot of stuff with we use the 70-20-10 metrics for like leadership development. So we're really trying to recognize the need for change management and building resilience for our staff all the time. And if you start to build that into the culture of your program, it's a lot easier to absorb changes, both big and small, because, prior to the pandemic, it seemed like we really kind of hummed along, and we were kind of doing the same thing all the time, didn't have a lot of technological changes, didn't have a lot of staff changes. And then all of a sudden it was just chaos, and people had change in their life and their home and how their kids went to school. And it was just so overwhelming for so many people. And so it really brought to the forefront, I think, the need to have kind of a long-term change management plan and really talk to staff regularly about resilience and their capacity to absorb change.
So with that in mind, thanks for both of your explanations. With that in mind, addressing or what do you think your experiences, let's talk about your experiences with change management, but maybe thinking in terms of addressing negative perceptions of change or acknowledging the inherent discomfort of change.
We definitely have some staff members that are like guns blazing, 100 miles an hour. They love change. They love every new thing. They love all the shiny new stuff. And then we have some other staff members who are like, no, I'd like to do it the way we did it in 1897. That's my workflow. And so it is difficult to manage like that big, broad spectrum of people. And I mean, I think transparency and endless amounts of communication are probably the best tools I've found for dealing with that. Because a lot of our lack of desire to change is like fear of uncertainty and changes that happened in the past that didn't go well. And so the more information that we can give to staff and the sooner we can give it to them, that has been very helpful, I think, especially getting in some of those negative Nellies kind of up to speed. And then just conversations about with people like, why are you worried about this? Because usually the staff members that are the most resistant to change, they have really good perspectives on why we should be afraid of it, like what is possibly going to go wrong. And so they're very good at identifying that, in my experience. And a lot of times it's the stuff that I didn't really realize was going to happen or could happen because I'm looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, so I think I think one of the critical aspects of kind of addressing people who have concerns about change management is really, really making sure that you find a way to provide assurance that there will be support through the entire process, right? And that's really hard to do if you are in an organization with a bad track record of that, right? If in the past change initiatives have been proposed and then, dropped from, up above, but there wasn't a ton of support, that's gonna bias your staff toward against future change projects, right? And I think making sure that's built into any kind of project where that's going to lead to significant change in the way people do their work and relate to one another is super important. And then Also just making sure, as Sarah kind of alluded to, is that people feel like they're heard, right? That their concerns are specifically being listened to, and more importantly is not making any promises that you can address all of those things, but at the very least making it clear that all of those things are being taken into consideration. And so that can make a big difference as well. And in some of our projects that we've worked with our clients, in leading up to implementations, when we do kind of demonstrations or presentations about what's about to come, we do often find that people who are raising objections are raising really valid ones that we didn't think about, right? So as much as you can do listening sessions and making sure that you get people's input along the way, I think it will lead to greater adoption and greater success.
Great. We do have, I think, Sarah, you took care of one of the questions. Thank you, about change management courses trainings. But we do have one question, and we can hold this to the end if it makes sense, but it's Matt is asking about if you have any advice for organizations where everyone is already at different levels of technology, how to get everyone at the same level easily while not taking too much time. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do have an example from the pandemic. So during the pandemic, I hadn't joined Just Tech yet. I was at a legal services organization, and the pandemic forced us to come up with a change management plan really quickly, and specifically to address this question about adapting to this new technology. Our organization kind of rallied to support our IT folks because there was only two of them. And so the plan was identify somebody in each team that is one of the more sort of either like a tech native or somebody who's just a lot more comfortable with tech, and kind of deputize them to help their colleagues with IT, with their tech issues, as sort of the first level of support, right? And then they can escalate as needed. And so then we had another level of people who staff wide, not necessarily in one specific unit, that were sort of like the slightly more advanced tech users. And then if they couldn't handle it, then it could get escalated to IT. And I think that really helped a lot. And it also helped in the sense that sometimes people are just a lot more comfortable, getting help from somebody that they work with regularly, on the work, right? Not necessarily like just always having to kind of go to IT. Um, and and that seems pretty effective in helping people learn things like, cloud-based storage for files and Microsoft Online and how that's different than the desktop, and then even some of the more convoluted things like how do you print something to the printer in the office when you're at home, and then, all of those kinds of things that we all had to kind of figure out that were really foreign to us. Yeah.
Great. Well, with
We
that,
do something similar.
go
Oh, I'm
ahead.
sorry, Haley.
No, go ahead.
We have, so if we do a new project, we have people on the project team that we call super users. And we let people know that you can reach out to your super user because they have been working on the project. So like if we're rolling out a new texting feature, the super users are going to be identified as the project team, and then people that people can reach out to, because they might not always be comfortable coming to like a manager or a supervisor. And we try to get people on our project teams from all levels of our organization. So a lot of our staff would be more comfortable reaching out to like a legal assistant and asking questions, or a fellow staff attorney than their supervisor. And we also have an innovation committee. So people know who those people are. They come to all of our program wides, and you can talk to them about your pain points and ask them questions and things, and our IT department.
And one other thing about the super users is that they become a really, really valuable source of information about what you're missing in terms of either support documentation, or maybe there's a workflow gap in your system that may not have become apparent, but the super users, because they are getting information, directly from people, it's an invaluable source of like of helping to identify trouble areas to address.
Great. So with that in mind, we have a little activity. Sarah, I think maybe you want to explain this one, but I would love for everybody to kind of put their thoughts in the chat as you do this. Go ahead.
So we're all just going to cross our arms. And now we're going to cross them the other way,
Which
if you can.
I can't do it. Well, kind of. It's not working. So what are your thoughts as you're doing this? I would love to hear this. Did it work for people? I'm going to go to the next one, but definitely put your impressions on that. And if you have more to go with it, Sarah, go ahead.
So, I mean, we just try to do little teeny things like this at meetings because it raises awareness about how you actually react to change versus the story you tell yourself about how you react to change. Because a lot of people will be like, I'm so great with change. But then when you do something like this, you realize you are not maybe as great with change as you think you are. And it can be really hard to change something that is really ingrained in our workflows or our everyday habits. And so I think I try to give people little activities like this that are free and easy to do with their staff so they can bring this to their meetings. And it really helps. And helps you too, like when you see how your colleagues react to something like this, like you can really identify those people that are like, oh, hey, no big deal. And then the people that get pretty frustrated. There's another one that's really good where you start writing out something, you give them like some kind of questionnaire to fill it out, and then they have to switch and try to write it out with their other hand. People don't usually react well to that one, but this one was great for a virtual meeting.
Thanks, Sarah. This I think leads into our next slide, strategies that you could use for effective change management. So I'm going to let you to kind of talk through number one. I don't know who wants to start.
I can start. Yeah. So I mean, I think with any project, right, you need to really define your objectives. And I think it may feel almost like a sort of meta project to kind of create a change plan, but I think you still have to define an objective for that, right? Like what you've got your sort of primary project, which is like maybe switch to a new case management system, right? But then you have to figure out what are your objectives for the change, right? Like, do you like set a goal of, starting with, within within the first week, or sort of after the first week of switching over, reduce the number of tickets to IT by X% or something, right? Like to kind of help you assess how effective your change plan is in all of that, and then really kind of determining like how ready is your organization for this change, right? And that will help you determine how much in terms of resources you need to allocate to the actual change management as opposed to the implementation project in and of itself. Because I think it's very easy for organizations to kind of discount the need to put a lot of energy and effort into change management, but sometimes that requires more energy than the sort of the plan for the change in and of itself. And we'll talk about this a lot, and we've already started talking about it, but communication, I think, is absolutely essential and central to an effective change management plan. And so your communication strategy kind of needs to be a consistent theme and thread as you are talking about the sort of from the beginning all the way to the end of that change.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think you have to define your objectives and know what success looks like. And it doesn't always mean perfection. And that's something we always try to convey to our staff. Like, as Tony was saying, we want to reduce the amount of tickets 10% in the first month. And I think, a lot of attorneys and people working in the legal field tend to be very perfectionistic. So letting staff know that there's built-in room for like adoption and learning these new things, and there's some grace built into it, can get a lot of people more willing to try, because there's always going to be people that are afraid they're going to be reprimanded or embarrassed in front of their colleagues. And so we do try to really make sure that we have some built-in time for people to learn how to do it, because it's going to be a big change. Like sometimes the tiniest thing can be a pretty big disruption to people's workflows. And, because we're building a culture of change and innovation, we try to build little things in constantly to assess the readiness of staff. And, when you know your team and you know who is going to have a hard time with something, you can start preparing those people more easily one-on-one. And if you've been through a few different changes, you should know kind of who is going to go really well with it and who's maybe going to have a little bit of a harder time. And then, of course, as we talked about, 100 layers of communication. I've never had somebody that was like, you gave me too much information, you communicated too much. They can just not read the emails or skim them, but at least they're there.
No,
So.
I totally get that. I do have one kind of follow-up for y'all, not related to number 2, but thinking about the efficiencies that you might gain from standardizing some things. If you have a lot of different change management things going on, how do you feel about creating kind of a standard template for the different pieces of planning that could easily be modified to fit the mold of whatever you're doing so that you can save time?
We have a standard like project plan that I created when I came into this role. And it has a lot of different metrics in it. And then we train our staff. I put on a quarterly like project management / change management training, because a legal case is a project too. And all the techniques that you can use in change management, you can use to help with client control and managing a legal case. So showing people how these strategies are not just good for their own lives and their whole team, but for their actual personal work that they're doing with their clients has been pretty successful. And, we do a newsletter, a couple different newsletters, and we have a section called On the Horizon. So even if it's something that's just kind of like in the conceptual phase, we'll put it on there with just like, hey, coming someday, change to texting. And just that like kind of breadcrumb trail that we put out there. And people know, like if it gets on the On Horizon thing, then eventually in like 2 or 3 months, you might get a bigger section in the newsletter. And so over the course of the last couple of years, we've been doing that same technique. And I mean, it makes it easy for the people doing it, but it also makes it, the staff kind of have an idea of what's coming to them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and in a similar vein, this actually comes more from the world of software development. And as a former product manager, it's sort of working in that role kind of really shaped the way I think about how to communicate with stakeholders. Maintaining something like the On Horizon kind of communications that Sarah was talking about. A lot of product managers will maintain a backlog of initiatives or things that the developers are working on. And it's usually not the same one that they're using to do the actual kind of, development work with their coders, but they might have like a public facing one that shows the priorities of the things that are being worked on now, and also things that are on the horizon, but in kind of the current priorities, right? And those can shift, but making that available to your customers or your stakeholders can really go a long way into helping them understand why their particular issue isn't being addressed right this minute, right? Like, and I think as similarly with big changes, if your organization is one that is kind of going through lots of different changes frequently and sometimes simultaneously, having some way to visually kind of give your staff a roadmap will help them understand like the where they are now, but also that in the future there are these other things coming, whether that's something they have to kind of gird themselves for and prepare themselves mentally, or something that they're excited for, right? So there's it just helps to kind of help everyone feel like they're moving in the same direction and on the same team.
Great. So how does that, maybe you've gotten into this a little bit, but is there anything that you would add on top of that when you have like really apprehensive staff? Or would you do anything differently based from what you've already said, I guess?
I mean, sometimes I try to have one-on-one meetings with those people so that they don't kind of come to a meeting with the whole staff and air all of their grievances and kind of start like a tumbling ball of negativity. So I might say to them, you're so good at identifying issues, and I could really use your help with this risk management plan. And like, and then if you can convince that person that your change is good, they can be like your best proponent, your best ambassador for your project. So that's one technique I've used in the past pretty successfully. Because if the negative Nelly is like, oh, I'm really excited about it, other people are going to be like, oh, okay. Well, if Kathleen doesn't think there's going to be anything wrong, maybe I shouldn't be worried about it. So, I mean, that is something that we strive to do. And I mean, they're just really, sometimes they can be hard to work with, but they can be really good on your project team. I always try to pick one person that's either really tech challenged or kind of negative, good at pointing out the things that might go wrong, because they see areas that I just don't see.
Okay, great. I can go to the next one unless you have anything to add to that, Tony.
No.
Okay, let's go here. So what we want to talk about here are the best practices for implementing change. So what would you say are those things that you would consider the best practices? And I think I have you, Tony, starting first on this one.
Yeah, so I would definitely start by making sure that you have really identified all of the stakeholders that you need to have involved in the process, right? Not every change involves every um, role or position in an organization, but it's also easy to overlook people whose input you might think initially is not that critical. And so just kind of start with that assessment so that you know then how to craft your outreach and communication with those different stakeholders. And really then develop a plan to kind of to be able to integrate all of those stakeholders in that process, right? It's not just talking at the folks that are going to be affected by the change, but really kind of getting them involved.
We have and I can come back, but based on what you're talking about, Tony, I think this is related to what you're talking about.
Right.
If you want to do
Yeah,
that.
so this is like a sort of stakeholder priorities and concerns matrix that we've used with our clients on some projects. And so this is where I was kind of talking about how you need to identify the different categories of stakeholders. And the categories, so each row, right, they might change from project to project depending on what that project is. In this case, it was a project to kind of assess document handling and document management processes. And so so then we sort of identified those categories of people by their relationship to those documents, right? And then each column was just sort of an area of kind of analysis that we needed to take to kind of really think through what are the things that are going to that these stakeholders are going to be thinking about when you talk to them about how documents are created, stored, accessed, and ultimately destroyed, right? And so this tool actually, I think, was one of the more effective ways that we were able to get the message across to all of the stakeholders that everyone has interests in this process and has a stake in this, and sometimes those interests and priorities may be in opposition, unfortunately. But And so it's all about trying to find that right balance. And it also helps, I think, to allow some stakeholders realize that there are interests other than theirs that they might not have thought about, right? So it's very easy if you're a staff person when management says, okay, now all of your files have to be saved in SharePoint and there cannot be anything on the local drive anymore. In fact, we're going to shut it down and there can't be anything on your desktop. It's got to be in SharePoint in this one place. It's really easy for a staff person to just absorb the negative aspect of that. Like, now I have to like completely rework the way I think about saving files. I have to create a copy first before I start typing. Otherwise, I'm going to be overwriting my old documents, all of these things that really kind of like, these are the things that this is how it impacts me. But maybe if you point at like, the other ways of storing things are not secure from a cyber security perspective, or management has to be able to have a way to guard against malpractice issues. And if they can't get to a file and the client is demanding their file, that's a problem. And so trying to kind of put all of this out in a way that isn't about like saying any one of these is more important than another, I think was really the goal when we kind of came up with this way of presenting these things.
So
From a
to
very practical standpoint, if you haven't done like a stakeholder metric before, you can take and put like a kind of scrubbed version of your project into ChatGPT and say, who could the possible stakeholders be? So like, I wouldn't probably put Lakeshore Legal Aid and like a bunch of kind of not confidential client. Obviously, we wouldn't put client information in, AI ever, but I wouldn't probably put any kind of proprietary information in there either. You'd have to follow your state's rules and your org's rules. But I will sometimes put like, we're going to do this project on gathering additional data for a probate clinic. And it's a legal service corporation and a nonprofit law firm, and who would the potential stakeholders be? And it'll spit out a list that is crazy long. And if you're a person that doesn't like to start on blank paper like me, you can then go through there and kind of be like, oh yeah, these are the 10 people I think, or the several departments that would be, stakeholders. And you can also ask it. You could take something like this and say to it, what security concerns would this group of stakeholders potentially find? And if after you do it a couple times, it makes it a lot easier as you go along. And then we take something similar to this, and then we use it to make our communication plan. And we aim our communication at what we've identified as like the things that motivate these departments or these particular people. And we also often try to bring it back to our mission statement, because hopefully we're all here for our mission to support our clients. And so that can be very motivating too.
I think the key here is that they don't have to be these extensively involved plans that have tons and tons of narrative and text, that they can be easily annotated or kind of create notes or changed up depending on your needs. We had a question from Jennifer Simmons wondering if the matrix is something that the change manager creates on their own, or if they do, or the stakeholders contribute and filled out. Now, I responded, in my experience, I've actually done this in a collaborative way where you kind of started out and I think both of you were describing kind of doing stuff in that way. And then you work collaboratively with your teams to kind of suss that out.
Right. Yeah. So this emerged from reviewing survey results and also after having interviewed various groups of these stakeholders. But everything was then kind of validated with those stakeholders. Like, is this an accurate kind of representation of your priorities and concerns? But if you have like like an innovation team like Sarah has, certainly that team could kind of serve that same role of creating the starting point for this, and then doing some kind of feedback process with the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And usually when you announce a new project, it's the people that don't want it that are going to immediately reach out and be like, here are all the things that are going to go wrong. I'm not saying that ever happens, but
Oh, it definitely
Yeah,
happened.
but in a
You'll
good
get the
way to,
occasional, like, I can't wait, but then the rest of
right,
it's gonna be like, I just don't think this is gonna go well, and
yeah.
I'm concerned about how long it's gonna take the accounting department to run these reports. And so a lot of it just sort of throws itself at your feet as you
Yeah.
start a new project.
And you've probably heard us talk a lot about the people who are resistant or people raising all of the things that are going to go wrong, but it's also an opportunity to ask people what do they want, right? Because and those are kind of two sides of the same coin. So sometimes you're just sort of reframing what they're saying, but there may be things that people have been thinking about needing in a
Mhm.
particular system or process for a long time that isn't on the radar. And so this is really that opportunity in a lot of ways to to try to suss those things out.
Yeah, I agree. I think when they raise their concerns, I mean, it really helps you figure out kind of the objectives and what success would look like for these different people. Because, success for an executive would maybe be like, I don't hear a lot of complaints from the staff. It's super secure. It's delivered on time and under budget. And success for the staff attorney might be like, it made my job easier, and it wasn't harder and it wasn't hard to learn. And I could find the information, and the training was easy and short. So, you can see when people raise concerns, you also can kind of see like, oh, well, if we address that concern, then that's probably going to be a success for that person.
Yeah, definitely. So with that in mind, we have a group discussion question. So we want all of you on the call here to put in your thoughts about which aspect of change management that you find the most challenging in your organizations. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but this will kind of go into the next discussion area that we're going to hit, which is building resilience and adaptability. I'll give you all a minute. Buy-in. Yeah, that's one I hear a lot.
No one wants to air their dirty laundry in the chat.
Oh, that's great.
Uh,
Very thoughtful. You're all coming in at the same time. All right. So we've got stuff about buy-in, influencing negative Nellies, motivation for things not working, ongoing training, another buy-in, but at the senior leadership level, communication. Let's see, and I'm just paraphrasing on some of these, and making sure that everyone understands what's going on, what the implications of the changes are. Apathy, I think I like that one. I'm going to go to the next slide so that we can kind of get into the discussion, but feel free to keep adding. Based off of that, we're going to go into talking about building resilience and adaptability. So Tony and Sarah, if you want to talk about how you cultivate that across organizations, hopefully that'll build off of some things that folks are putting in the chat.
yeah, so I think that a lot of people have a hard time with buy-in. And the struggle that I've seen is that people say that they agree and they don't really agree because they're afraid to say they don't agree. And why? Because that hasn't always worked out in the past with projects. And so I think part of building like this culture, this organization-wide culture of change management and adaptability is making sure people know that there is a safe place to air your concerns. It doesn't always have to be public. It could be a one-on-one, and that there's multiple avenues to do that. Maybe they need to just like tell their supervisor, who can then come to you, or like we have our innovation committee. So you can go to the person on the innovation committee, air your like pain point, we call it, and then they don't really tell who said that. Like they'll just kind of say, some of the staff raised this concern. So there's kind of this anonymity to it. And that helps. I think that helps because if people are allowed to say why they're concerned and those concerns are able to be addressed, then they actually buy in. They don't just tell you to placate you that they're buying in. Because I would say that's been like one of the biggest struggles that I've had. And also I would agree, as Shelley's pointing out in the chat here, poverty mindset. It can be really hard to kind of understand that sometimes we do need to spend a little bit more money and take a little bit more time, because in the end it pays off. So I usually do like return on investment analysis after the projects that I share with staff, where I'm like, oh, hey, we spent $500 to do this thing. And I know that in your mind, we could have had like, 10 more hours of a lawyer, a part-time lawyer doing the work or whatever it is. But guess what? In the long run, we saved 500 hours of staff time a year, because this one button that we made for $500 saves everybody, an hour a year. And that ends up over the course of our whole thing. So if you do that a few times, and that's part of your like change management plan, like I try to put like how much money it might save, how many hours of people's work, so that I'm touching on multiple motivators for folks, and they can see why sometimes this is worth investing in.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think that type of analysis is really helpful, I think, with one of the kind of concerns that was raised in terms of managing up, right? Like getting senior management to buy into the project. That's a tough position to be in, right? The most effective change management strategies are going to be ones that have senior management buy-in from the beginning, or it's even driven by senior management, where they're the ones kind of pushing for the change. I think, being able to really articulate the benefit to the organization in terms that will make the most sense to the person, or the role that you're speaking to. Not in any kind of like cynical way, obviously, but, oftentimes as we kind of, like thinking back to that matrix, that stakeholder matrix, right? It's really easy to kind of focus on only a few aspects of, a few priorities for a few different stakeholders, as opposed to being able to kind of map it out completely for everybody. And but if you can take it that step further that Sarah was describing, and actually quantify things, right? Either in dollars or time saved, or, that that's definitely going to be um, another kind of feather in your cap in terms of being able to go to a critical stakeholder and get them to really throw their support behind you.
Absolutely. I think that actually goes into the next slide as well. So you've talked a little bit about like motivating staff and how to embrace change. In the next slide, still talking about building resilience and adaptability, we're focusing more on how to maintain momentum, but what's the role of leadership in modeling that resilience? You've kind of touched on it a little bit, but is there anything else that you would maybe, I guess, advise or give some advice or strategies for how to do that?
So fortunately, we have a super innovative executive team in our organization. So they are always ready to do, to try new things. I mean, a few things that I've learned is that if you call things a pilot, people seem to be more willing to do them, because it doesn't mean that you're stuck with it forever. It's a trial. We're trying out something new. So that has been a really successful tactic I've used with management. Like, let's pilot this, let's try this. Because then, the message is kind of like, we're letting the staff know that we heard their concerns, that we're trying to address the issue. Here's a solution that we're going to try out. So it makes people feel like they're heard. And then, of course, if it doesn't work out, we framed it as a pilot, so nobody's really failed. And we'll talk about what we learned from it and what the next pilot might be. And if you let the management kind of be the ones to convey that these ideas are happening to their team, we kind of have like a communication mountain. Like, you kind of come up with the idea, you talk to a couple people that might be involved, then you kind of go to your supervisor, then you kind of go to like a director, and then you kind of go up to the executive team. And once you get that kind of approval, then you kind of communicate back down. And that way everybody knows in kind of the right order. And I think that has been, and it helps get the approval from the executives, because by the time it gets to them, you're like, well, I have several people that are interested in doing this with me. who are willing to commit their time, because, you know, we're always scarce on time or money at legal aid. And so if you can show that there's enthusiasm for it, that there are people that are interested in it, that it's not going to be forced upon them, it's easier to get management to be like, well, okay, you got a bunch of people that are willing to try it out. Sure, I can sign on to that. And then that helps you communicate it back down. So that's one of the techniques that we've used.
Great. Is
Yeah,
there
and
anything else you want to add, Tony?
I think making sure that you get as much communication from leadership directly to staff about the changes. Like if you know, I think organizations that have like an internal kind of regular newsletter from the executive director that includes messaging, like they're already really far ahead in being able to have this vehicle for for kind of modeling that resilience if the executive director is saying like, we've got this big change coming up, I'm really excited about it, this is how it's going to help all of you guys, and help the organization so that we can better serve our clients, right? Like, because they could be fully behind an initiative, but if people aren't hearing that from their own voice, it can be
Mhm.
really hard to kind of either discount that or forget that, or sort of as you're in the trenches, like trying to change the way you have to open a case in the case management system, or and then like griping about all these new fields that you have to fill out. Like if there's a sort of regular encouragement communication from leadership, I think that makes a huge difference.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you have to tell them what you need from them. They have a million things going on. You need to have like a 10-minute conversation where you're like, listen, I need you to be the most enthusiastic you've ever been. I need you to talk about how this is the greatest thing we're ever going to do. Like, and here's the 4 points I'd like you to talk about. I mean, the easier you can make it for them, the easier it is for them to help you help the entire organization.
That's a
So,
really good
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
I mean, even if it's like writing the blurb, hey, could you throw this into your newsletter? Could you talk about this at the next staff wide meeting? Here's some talking points. Like the easier you can make it for people who are busy, 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 and who don't know, like when you're knee deep in the project, it's easy to remember, like not everybody knows as much about it as you do. They need you to give them more information so that they can give that information to other people. So,
Right.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump into, we only have about 12 minutes or so left. So I'm going to kind of move us along a little bit, but in this, sorry, I thought I turned this off if you can see that. We have a group discussion question. I'm posting it in the chat for everybody to respond to. So it's, and I can go to it on the screen as well if I go back to my page. So we want to know what your organizations are doing well and what they're not doing well. They don't have to be like really descriptive or whatever, but just a couple of things about what you think are doing well or not. And then we are going to dive into change management in action. And we're going to use the pandemic as our playground so I'll try to kind of keep an eye on the chat while people respond and try to interject as possible, but you guys can go ahead and get started. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to do much to kind of explain the context here, right? Everybody in the world kind of had to experience significant change to the way they lived during the pandemic. Um, and so, I mean, I think that organizations that had that kind of resilience and the sort of innovative culture that Sarah is describing were the ones that probably fared the best during this time, right? And and there definitely were changes at all levels of the work, right? Like how do you see clients? How do you deal with people needing to like who just walk in um all the time? Maybe they don't have phones because they're unhoused, and like how do you make sure that you can continue services for them? All the way to like how do you make sure that your attorneys can still access their files? And different organizations had to really kind of scramble, or all organizations had to scramble to figure all of this stuff out, and there wasn't a roadmap for it. So this is kind of like probably like, you know, huge studies being done in business school about like how organizations adapt to these types of changes, dramatic changes. So I think I already kind of previewed a lot of what I was thinking about talking about, which is like for the organization where I was when the pandemic struck, the technology aspect of it was kind of a central kind of area where we needed to put a lot of energy and resource into figuring out how are we going to do this with our relatively small IT department. And so organization wide, we came up with a sort of like, tech helper model, um, and then had to do a lot of things on the fly, right? Like, okay, we don't have enough laptops for everybody. We'll have to ask people if they can use their own personal devices, but they have to be willing to enroll them into the, device management systems so that we're protecting client information. And so there became that led to a plan to kind of figure out, okay, so before we shut down the office, this is the schedule, and on this day, these people need to bring their laptops in. So there was just sort of this kind of rolling, um, kind of effort of coming up with the next step on the fly. But I think a lot of that had to do with the collective sense of urgency around like we have to do this and we have to do it as best as we can. We can't just leave it up to IT to figure it out for us. Like let's all get together and be as creative as we can be.
I completely agree. I think there was a lot of change. We onboarded like a ton of staff and we had to change gears and do online dockets and things. And we built some of that boat as we were like riding down the rapids. And I think the biggest struggle so far has been now that it's calmed down and we have time and funding and staffing to kind of take a look at it, people can be a little resistant to having it pointed out that there's different things we could do better, because it doesn't mean that you didn't do the best you could with what you had when you did it on the fly, but it can be very like hard for people to hear like, well, we should probably do these 4 different things. Like we're not going to, we also had staff using their computers and now we're like, well, we really don't want you to use your home computer. We purchased computers for everybody. It would be better if everybody used the staff computers, and people that spend a lot of money on a computer and don't want to use like a used one that Lakeshore buys for them aren't so thrilled at maybe having to take a less nice computer because they took the time and money. But I mean, we're trying our best, right, to be flexible about some of these things and to give good messaging to folks about how like just because we're changing things doesn't mean that you did something wrong or that it wasn't like the best effort that you could give in the circumstances. We don't want to hurt feelings. We're not trying to have our staff quit. It's already a stressful, difficult job. We want people to feel like seen and valued as well.
I think one of the things about the pandemic that was probably the hardest in terms of change management was that it didn't afford a lot of opportunity to get the client's voice in as a stakeholder, right? And I think a lot of organizations had to kind of put themselves in their client's shoes to come up with the sort of client needs in a lot of ways. So I think organizations that were probably the most effective of that probably were the ones that came up with a lot of really creative and innovative solutions for things like my client doesn't ever do video conferencing. They don't do Zoom because they don't work in a job in front of a computer, right? So how do we come up with a solution for them to do video chat where they don't have to create an account or like, you know, um, things like that. And so one thing that my organization had to do was figure out how to do volunteer clinics where volunteer attorneys were still helping clients with applications when they were, you were supposed to not be in contact with one another. And so it really kind of tested our ability to really kind of think through what all of the workflows that we took for granted in this new environment and you know, in doing that, I think it actually helped to kind of kickstart that culture of resilience, and the development of a culture of like, oh, we can figure this out because we figured out how to, how to do some pretty crazy stuff during the pandemic.
Yeah, we definitely remind our staff, like, remember how we made it through, like, leaving the office when we thought we were going to be gone for 3 days? Then, 6 months later, they were like, come get your crap out of your desk so that we could spray it down with toxic chemicals. And I mean, I try to remind staff, like, hey, remember when so-and-so came up with the idea that our clients could come into our parking lot and use our Wi-Fi because they didn't have Wi-Fi? Like, we came up with so many innovative ideas, and reminding people that we did it on a shoestring budget with like not really tech savvy people all the time, and we managed, has been very helpful. And I mean, honestly, just always reminding people that we're here to not put up additional barriers for our clients who already have so many barriers, and that we need to be not part of the problem when it comes to technology, and that we've got to use technology to serve our clients, just like the big law firms are serving the people that are trying to, keep our clients down with technology. So we do a lot of reminders about that kind of stuff.
I mean, I think that's great. This last one was success stories and lessons learned, which I think both of you have kind of been touching on and talking about. I think one of the things that, at least that I've witnessed or been a part of is, kind of people thinking there's this like hard line between going through the pandemic. Okay, now let's go back to normal kind of thing, and sort of ignoring some of those changes that maybe they could have learned from or things like that. So that's something that I think is interesting, that sometimes as human beings, we don't like to retain what we learned, and we like to go back to what seems familiar or normal because maybe it hasn't stuck in some way. And that could be potentially related to maybe how well the change was actually implemented. Sorry, there's something flying around my head, or something like that. But that's just kind of my 2 cents. We have just a couple of minutes left. I put some of the resources. We have a few slides that have the resource. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. That have our resources in here. And so I just put them in the chat. So we have about 3 slides worth of that. Is there any questions that anybody wants to ask at the moment, while you have Tony and Sarah online for a couple of minutes? That maybe some burning question that we didn't get answered for you?
Could I ask a philosophical question? This is Jennifer Simmons. Just,
Absolutely.
I, in full transparency, have what I've recognized in my maturity is some like pretty strong anti-democratic tendencies. I tend to think I know what's going to be best, and I really get frustrated with pushback. And so I think that tension between democracy and letting people weigh in, it does trigger buy-in. But at the same time, sometimes I worry that when you share too much information, people when people share their thoughts, it gives them room to get disappointed when you don't take their ideas, or letting people know about something that may not be 100% certain to happen may lead them to worry about something that might not necessarily be the case. And so I wonder, it's not a really specific question, but I wonder if you have any thoughts you guys can share about that, like, spectrum of, obviously full transparency is a lot and probably not desirable, but then like full transparency to full opacity in terms of information sharing and buy-in building and feedback solicitation.
Well, I definitely don't do very many surveys that have just open-ended questions, allowing people to ramble, because they will talk about things that are completely off topic. They will use a survey about technology to talk about the bathroom in their office sometimes. So I try to, when I do staff surveys, I try to make them kind of tailored, and kind of limit the choices. And I mean, part of it is just really talking about the scope of the project and the objectives. And one thing that I do with folks is, like, if they have an idea that we just can't put into this project, I mean, I'm very nice about it. I say, I think that is a great idea. It's not going to be part of phase one. We always have a list of like, you know, backlog or, you know, projects or things that staff have asked for that aren't realistic right now or aren't in our priorities. And I just tell people like, hey, I'm going to put that onto this list, like the staff wish list. I recognize that it's a great idea. The technology doesn't exist. We don't have the money, whatever the case may be. And I mean, I have found so far that really seems to, I don't want to say placate staff, but satisfy them that their concern was heard and that their idea wasn't just sloughed off. And if I do have to say we cannot do that, I give reasons, like not always too much reasoning, but I might say, hey, you know, that's unfortunately that wouldn't work for our pro bono department and they need something completely different. And if we did that, we changed the name of this field or we changed the business process for this, it might make their clinics impossible to run. And usually like people, for the most part, tend to be pretty cognizant of not making their coworkers' jobs any harder than they are. So those things have been pretty good. And then, you know, I will kind of use AI sometimes to make sure that I'm not reading too much into like an email or a message from a staff member. So I might be like, what's the tone of this? Am I overreacting and thinking they're mad at me when they're not? And I might ask ChatGPT to make my emails nicer. And, you know, can you make it more professional? And you know, can you have this certain tone to it so it doesn't seem like I'm just dismissing them? Because I mean, I do feel kind of the same way. Like I want everybody to be able to come with me to me with their ideas, but sometimes I'm like, why do you come to me with such stupid ideas? But you can't ever let anybody know that your knee-jerk reaction was like, oh God, another one of these dumb ideas, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to stop people from coming to you with ideas because sometimes they're awesome. So
I mean, that's
you know,
part of human nature, though. I mean, I think.
right.
I mean, I share some of those tendencies as well, and I guess that's maybe why and now I'm a consultant to make recommendations and then leave. So, but I think it's a balance of kind of recognizing when you do actually know better because you've been thinking about the user experience or you've been thinking about the user interface a lot, right? And then trying to find a way to communicate and explain that without seeming like you're being overbearing or trying to be sort of passive aggressive about it, but like really just trying to like walk somebody through it. And then but then there are times when I think in service of the change management strategy and in service of the sort of encouraging that culture of kind of collaborative change, you do have to kind of open things up and you know process and emphasize process over results sometimes, and that can be hard for a lot of folks like me who are kind of results oriented, and but there's you know it's kind of trying to figure out balance project to project. Like I don't think it's like a universal position that you have to stake out on everything.
I mean,
Boundaries
ultimately,
are
the product
so
doesn't matter if the
important.
whole staff hates it and don't want to use it. So like
Right.
the human factor is you can't get around it really.
Right.
So, and you know, if you suffer through all of the kind of dumb suggestions and the first couple projects, you build like authority or respect among your coworkers and they trust you more to do a good job. And so you get less and less, I feel like as the trust builds because you've been through multiple projects and they know that you're going to have a good result, the resistance tends to go down in my experience. The first few projects can be painful, but I think the more projects you lead successfully, the more staff are like, okay, well, Jennifer really does meet our needs and I'm going to trust her with this process. It gets
Yeah.
better.
It does. And I think just kind of what both of you have said to tie it up, it's true that balance is so important between like process and that kind of like making it open so that people feel like they have a voice or a say in something, but you have to be careful in how much you give because you could get stuck in that discussion like decision paralysis for a really long time. And so your subject matter experts who are guiding the process or whoever it is really have to kind of play that tightrope to ensure that things keep moving forward. And that's where I think project management and change management really kind of intersect in a pretty well together. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Thank you everyone for joining and sticking around for a few more minutes with us. Shelley, I believe you post the slides to the website. Anything else you want to say to wrap up at this point?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to our speakers. Appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge with the community. I also want to mention that our next webinar is going to be on September 17th, and it's going to be a discussion on measuring user experience. So after you've created these projects and implemented them, or while you're in the process, how can you look at user experience? So please join us for that, and always check our website for upcoming events. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.